So either the parent then has to supplement whatever the school is not providing, or they have to become an advocate, which they don't get paid for, to make sure that their kid and the other kids within that classroom are getting the access that this law created. So you have a plan, but you have no execution. You have no way of getting there. And the onus kept going down until the parent had to absorb all of that and become an advocate, a lawyer, the enforcer, the planner, the whole thing.
Over the past few years, a lot of institutions have started replacing structure with flexibility, unlimited PTO, hybrid work, unfunded mandates, even the way we think about ownership and financial security. But one of the things that we've been talking about more this year is what happens when systems remove the support structure, keep the expectation, and quietly transfer responsibility downstream to the individual household. And that's the mechanism in this conversation: responsibility transfer. The institutions keep the leverage, but the builder absorbs the instability, the time loss, the financial exposure, and eventually the execution burden. So today we want to talk about what happens when flexibility becomes another word for unsupported responsibility.
And one of the things that we've moved toward in politics is talking about time margin and what that looks like as a part of the culture. Used to be that you would have a 40-hour work week, whether you work from 7 to 3 or from 8 to 4 or 9 to 5. You knew that you were going to work 40 hours. As a part of that 40 hours, you may get 2 weeks vacation and you may get some holidays off, but you knew what your time was. One of the things that shifted decades ago was you had companies move toward paid sick leave, pension vesting schedules, Lynn having unlimited PTO. And what that did was it shifted the mindset of the employee, meaning studies have shown that when you have unlimited PTO, typically what has happened is individuals aren't taking it as much. And they aren't putting in that rest period that allowed them to either level set or recoup some of what they need in order to be effective at their job. So this is the question I have for you. Do you believe that with the elimination of some of those policies, that the older systems may have been thrown out without adequately thinking about what it is that the throughput or output of that was going to be? And meaning, have we normalized instability by simply renaming it flexibility?
I think that institutions want productivity.
Mm-hmm.
And so they weren't really thinking about the employee and their mental, psychological, whatever health, because they did things that were going to benefit the organization. So let's just take the unlimited PTO.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it sounds fantastic, right? It's great. And the reason why people, I think, don't do it as much is because there's psychological implications to it. So there are no social pressures. There are no timelines. There's nothing that motivates someone to take that additional PTO. And if you start doing it, maybe because of the way we were wired or whatever it is, you start to feel guilty about taking it. Now, if you had it defined 2 weeks, like everybody takes 2 weeks, you're going to take it because everybody gets it. You're expected to do it. It benefits the organization because you're just work. And if there is a rift with the employer or employee, I don't have to pay you.
So do you think we're seeing that in some ways with the hybrid or flex schedule, where you see a lot now, and obviously COVID changed individuals being able to work from home. And now you see a lot of organizations going, I need you in the office 3 days a week or 5 days a week. And you see individuals sort of pushing back on that? Or what are your thoughts on the hybrid or flex or work from office pendulum we now see starting to impact families? Because people could theoretically work from anywhere. It made it easier for Lynn to move to Austin or do her job from California. But now, hell, if you have a company that's based in Denver and they're saying, hey, we need for you to work from the office 3 days a week, and you're going, but I live in Texas. And they're going, well, you know what? You need to work on moving back to the Denver area if you want to have this job.
So I think that the companies, because now research showed that employees were less productive when they worked from home. In fact, a lot of studies show they were more productive when they worked from home. So this mandate that people go back into the office, I think that it's from just older thinking. Because if you think about being able to work from home and having those buffers, then, a lot of times, and I hate to say this, but sometimes you're just one paycheck away or one sickness away from being in dire straits. So if I have the ability to take my kids to school, to take them to the doctor, to be mindful about my health, then I am a better person, which in turn would make me a better, more productive employee. So I really try, and I struggle with these companies that are like, you need to be back into the office. But why? If not just because you are a micromanager. Help me to understand. People will say, well, because of the social benefits, because of this. And I will say that I went to go see The Devil Wears Prada 2. And one of the things that I kind of longed for a little bit was that socialization of an office, like going to lunch with someone, doing those things. And also the 4-inch heels. I was like, dang, when's the last time I wore some heels? At any rate, I think that there are some benefits to it, but I can also say being in the office, I was probably less productive because somebody was always stopping by my desk. Somebody was always just chit-chatting in the break room. We had food, like just every day it was catered in. It was unhealthy, unproductive. And I look at it, I was like, I get more work done at home than I do in the office because it's just like a social hour here. And you're like, you'd have to put up signs that say working, don't disturb or whatever, because people are just like, oh, hey, how you doing?
Yeah, but some people, I get that there's a requirement sometimes. And yes, for team building and things of that sort, I think it's important. I also think it's important for the culture to have some of that happen. I do believe that in terms of the time margin aspect, that we have to be careful and we have to make certain that we are not stretching ourselves too thin. So the second receipt for politics is what we will call relational clarity. So we've had over the past, especially with this administration, where they have had these different requirements that come down the pike, and they're asking states to do certain things. But at the same time, they're not funding what it is that they're asking the states to do. States are then asking the local government to do these things that they are being put to task for. And the local government is saying, well, we don't have the funds to do it. And so the local government is then asking the individual households, Lynn and John and whomever else, to do it. And what we're seeing is that the responsibility is trickling down to the person who is the one who is most impacted, who has the least ability to enact those policies. So the question I have, when we talk about the instability that comes out of some of the policies that are happening in the government, but the systems that enact those policies are theoretically going and making the individuals who are least equipped responsible for them, what do you say to stuff like that?
Well, so here's the thing that's interesting, because a lot of times laws, mandates get passed with no action plan.
Okay.
So, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to talk about FAPA, so the free appropriate public education for special needs students. So I'm going to specifically use Texas. So this is a federal law that every student should have access to free education, and it needs to be appropriate. So if you couple that with IDEA, that it has to be an individual plan that's going to help that student be the best version of themselves. That's a great law. I love it so much. Federal government, as we know, they're not really keen on doing things. They love to put together plans. And so they're like, here's state, here Texas Education Agency, you make this happen. Okay, well, you know what we're going to do? We're going to add to this plan. Like, you have to do this, Austin ISD. You have to do this, Houston ISD. So do it. Houston ISD, Austin ISD. Okay, I can't find any teachers that are qualified. There's a shortage of teachers, and there's specifically a shortage of teachers for special education. It's just not good. And then I need to train them. I need to continue to give them professional learning and support. We don't have that kind of money. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a teacher that may or may not be certified into this classroom. Okay, well, the kids may have a individual plan, but it's kind of sucky. And basically, sometimes you'll go into the classroom and the kids are coloring. Wow, you are really doing it. And then it comes to the parent. So then the parent is like, you're not doing or giving my kid what they need under this federal law. So either the parent then has to supplement whatever the school is not providing, or they have to become an advocate, which they don't get paid for, to make sure that their kid and the other kids within that classroom are getting the access that this law created. So you have a plan, but you have no execution. You have no way of getting there. And the onus kept going down until the parent had to absorb all of that and become an advocate, a lawyer, the enforcer, the planner, the whole thing. And some parents don't have those resources. And so then the kid just gets lost.
So, okay. So could the argument not be made that part of that is part of being a parent? How much of that is being a parent versus being...
I love neurotypical parents that say stuff like that.
I'm just asking.
Literally wish that they were physically in my vicinity. I would love that so hard. So let's just say this for neurotypical parent. Let's just say you have a neurotypical kid. They're in the classroom. You have a person that used to work in the military. They have no certification. They've never taught before other than teaching somebody how to shoot a gun. Excellent. Now they are the social studies teacher. So they have their curriculum. They have what they're supposed to do, the state standards. They don't know. They're just barely like, read this book. Okay, here's a test. So the kids come out. They don't know anything. Is that okay with you, neurotypical parent?
It's not, but yeah, I get it.
Why not? Isn't it your responsibility, neurotypical parent, to teach your children?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. What I hear you saying is that it's not fair for parents of kids with special needs to have to go and above, to have to do a lot more, not more, but a lot more than someone who may not have a child who has special needs in order to provide that child a decent chance of learning.
Either you do this, either you say there's no such thing as all of these laws that protect these children. Okay. You just don't do it because you're not doing it. You're barely doing it. So let's just say you don't have it. Okay, then great. All the onus is then on the parent. But if you made a promise, if you made a commitment that because I'm paying my taxes, I'm contributing to the society, that you're going to allow every single student to have a free, equitable education, then you give every student a free and equitable education. I don't care if they're neurotypical, atypical, whatever typical, neurodivergent, whatever they are. It doesn't matter. You said it, now make it happen.
Good point. The question I have for you, and this is going into the third receipt, and it's about ownership. You own a home, and we talked about home ownership before. If you own a business, sometimes you can take out SBA loans. We did have a lot of people get into trouble by accepting those PPP loans that apparently weren't utilized to either fund the business that they were setting up, or they took it and did something else with those loans. The irony of all of that is you have a shit ton of folks sitting in Congress who took out PPP loans and didn't use them for the reason that they took them out, and they're fine. But those black and brown folk who took out those PPP loans, you going to jail.
Just because you're white adjacent doesn't mean you're white. So I don't know how many times I must tell you this.
Okay. So the question I have, when we think about black and brown folk and home ownership and the ability that home ownership allows us to create with respect to either wealth or access to capital or access to income that can either fund retirements or fund businesses or something of that sort. Do you think we put too much value on that?
No. What do you mean? Talk to me a little bit more about that.
Meaning that the American way of life is you buy a home, you use that home, you build up the equity in that home that allows you to, if you're fortunate enough to have that home paid off when you retire, you have equity that can then be sent down to your kids, and that allows them to have that leg up. Do you think that Black folk and brown folk put too much in terms of how we can use that to build income versus if you are renting, taking the monies that, and I'm just using an example here, if you're renting and you are paying someone else's mortgage, obviously, but you can use some of that nut that's between what it may cost you to rent versus what you may be spending on your mortgage and invest it in a business or invest it in the stock market. Do you think we view home ownership the right way, or do you believe, or do you think we can use other vehicles to accomplish those goals?
I think we can use other vehicles to accomplish it, but I think it's important to strive for home ownership. And let me tell you why.
Okay.
First off, there are tax deductions, right? And then for me, it gives me a little bit more comfort knowing that I own my home, because I can always sell my home and I can take that equity, because I can always downgrade. I can get a smaller home. I can always take that equity, which is a comfort to me, and sell this home, get a different home, $200,000, $300,000 that now is my capital. I have this money. That gives me comfort. And let me tell you, when you have ownership and when you have access, you know that there are decisions that you can make that can give you real money to do it. For some reason, for me, it makes me feel braver. It makes me feel like I can go and try and start my own business, or I can do other things because.
Okay, so let me push back there, because you and I both know, even though you have a home ownership is expensive. There's always be some shit that happens. There's a roof that has to be replaced.
Please stop talking, because I'm in a good space right now.
There's HVAC that needs to be replaced. There's water lines that are going to break. And so you have those unexpected costs.
Yeah.
So Lynn is spending, let's say, average, typically you say 1% of what the value of your home is for annual maintenance. So if you live in a $500,000 house, you need to have $5,000 that you're going to be spending with respect to maintenance on your house. However, if a person who's comfortable living in an apartment and paying $2,000 a month or so, and I don't have any of those expenses, why shouldn't I take that money that I would be using on maintenance to invest in launching my own business, or invest it into other things that's going to require me not to have to worry about whether or not there's a freaking water break with respect to my front yard?
Okay, a few things. First off, that's one of the reasons why I do my 30 or 90-day fast, because I account for that. And so when you look at home ownership, it's not, here's your down payment of $100,000 and this is my mortgage each month. You need to allocate in those unforeseen costs. And that's what I do. I mean, I don't like paying it. But I know that ultimately this house is 20 years old, that I think we built it right before the youngest one was born, and things are going to break. I hate it, especially being a single person. I hate it, but I know that I have to make strategic decisions. So I do the fast at the beginning of the year to account for things that are going to ultimately come up, either the car or the house. The second thing that I was going to say is that, yes, I think everybody knows I'm a little bit more conservative, not much of a risk taker when it comes to my money. And so I like to have knowns. And I know that even if the market is low, the housing market is low, eventually it's going to come back up because it's cyclical like that. It's just going to happen. And then I know that I have at least X amount of equity in this home. I know that. And I get, like I said, it's comfort to me knowing that I can always sell it. I can go downgrade. I can go live in a shack. I'm not doing that. But I could do that, right? And then because home or ownership or any type of investment is volatile, anything could happen. You don't have a cushion, because all you're doing is you're putting all your eggs into one basket. When I said that having a home and having that equity and having that access to the capital that I know that I can get, whether I take out a home equity loan or I do whatever, I know I can leverage my home to get cash if I needed it. So that gives me comfort. It makes me more willing to invest in things, to do things, because I'm like, if it fails, whatever, I still got this house.
Okay, so this is what I would say on that, because I have a couple of different theories. I'm a huge proponent of home ownership because I think it does a couple of things. From a cultural standpoint, home ownership has shown us, and I brought it up at the beginning of this particular segment of the conversation. If Lynn has a home and Lynn retires and she has equity in that home, that is something that she can pass down to her kiddos to be able to have a leg up. That is something traditionally that hasn't been available to Black and brown folk. When you think about starting off If someone had $150,000 or $200,000, that is different and puts her in a completely different financial position 10 years later than someone who is starting from zero. That's the first thing. There are times, however, that it does make more sense not to own a home. If I'm a professional athlete and I have no idea where I'm going to be playing year in and year out, it doesn't make sense for me to buy a home in every city that I live in, because I can get traded 5 times over 10 years. And if I purchase a home in every city, that's a lot of properties to manage, especially if you do not want to be a property manager. So in that instance, I would say do one of two things: get a condo or get something where you're only there 6 months out of the year. Then find where it is that you will want to live and set up shop. And this is what most professional athletes do. And that's why you have a lot of here in Atlanta, where they will buy their forever home and they will just rent where it is that they're playing for those 6 months out of the year. That makes more financial sense. And then thirdly, I would say, I asked a question rhetorically with respect to whether or not it benefits us in the culture. I think one of the things that we have to understand is, and as you said, owning something allows us to have a sense of belonging. You can always go back to where it is that you may have grown up, hopefully, to those memories that are attached to that will forever be important. And as you have kiddos that are growing, you can take them back to tell them their stories. Now, you may never want to live there again, but it's still a part of your story. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so a few things. First off, stop saying I grew up in Enid, Oklahoma, because I didn't.
Yeah,
I will sue you for libel and
Where
whatever.
did you graduate from high school?
I literally went to high school there for 6 months. Stop.
Okay, but that's part of where you grew up.
Okay, so that's a tiny sliver where I grew up. So first, the first thing I'll say is there is comfort in knowing that my mom owns property in Oklahoma. And so I will say this: if a job sucks and I'm just like, you know what, I can always move to Enid and and own this town. Like, this is great. I can do that. Also, there was a point during COVID where I had this idea that we were going to build these tiny homes on the farm and that we could all just live there. And because if I sold this house and I have capital, I was like, nobody has to work. We can just live there and we can have communal, like the refrigerator and food and big table. My mom's like, how are you going to get to Costco? And I was like, just a hater. You can go to Oklahoma City and go to Costco. But, there's comfort in that, knowing that I'm not going to be unhoused because I can always go and live there, whether I want to or not, I can do it. The second thing I was going to say about the athletes, and I like this thing you said about them owning a home somewhere and then renting, because sports, that's a volatile profession, because you could break your leg, do whatever, and then that's that, you're done. But if you have the home ownership and you've allocated some of your funding to real estate, that's something that you can always count on. I don't necessarily think that you should just rent because you are a sports athlete. I think you should rent where it makes sense, but have a home somewhere, whether it's your parents, where you grew up, where like you and your spouse maybe or partner want to maybe retire. Like, there's plenty of opportunities to buy a home. And if you don't like it there, sell it and go buy it someplace else. But at least you have some income that is more secure than playing a sport that is contingent on you not getting hurt.
I agree with part of what you said with respect to them playing a sport. I think that sport that they play that gives them that income allows them access to be able to do certain things.
No. I don't think so. I think that the strategic athletes diversify their money. But there are some, what do they call them, ballers? And people still say that. They're in a party every week. I'm giving money to every Tom, Dick, and Harpo. So you just proved my point, right? There are people that are not financially responsible, even though they're making an enormous amount of money. And then they're like, well, this is going to continue. They go out, they break their femur. That's a career-ending move, and they're done. They're out.
So what's the point? The point is this: instability does not always arrive as collapse. Sometimes instability arrives disguised as flexibility, convenience, personalization, or freedom. One of the things builders have to learn is how to recognize a system that has actually transferred execution risk onto the individual household while still pretending the institution is carrying the responsibility. That's what the conversation really is about. Limited PTO sounds progressive until the employee becomes responsible for regulating their own recovery inside a system that quietly punishes rest. Hybrid work sounds flexible until the company changes the rules and the employee observes the relocation costs, the childcare disruption, and the lifestyle instability. Public education laws sound equitable until the funding, staffing, or enforcement of the burden falls onto the parent, who now has to become the advocate, the lawyer, the case manager, the accountability system, just for their child to receive what was already promised. That's the mechanism. The institution keeps the authority. The builder absorbs the execution. And once you see that pattern, you start seeing things everywhere. You see it in healthcare, in housing, in employment, in entrepreneurship. More and more systems are shifting the guaranteed structure to individualized management, meaning the modern builder is increasingly expected to become their own infrastructure. That's why ownership matters in this conversation. Not because ownership magically solves instability, because it doesn't. Homes break, markets fluctuate, businesses fail, but ownership creates optionality. It creates leverage. It creates the ability to absorb shocks without immediately collapsing underneath them. In an environment where institutions are transferring more responsibility downward, optionality becomes survival infrastructure. So watch this over the next 30 to 60 days. Watch how many institutions continue to reduce guarantees while increasing individual responsibility. Watch employment structure, watch education funding fights, watch return to office mandates. Watch how many systems continue asking households to self-manage risk that institutions used to absorb themselves. Because if that's the trend and it continues, the premium of builders who have margin, liquidity, ownership, and flexibility is going to rise dramatically. And if the trend reverses, and institutions start rebuilding stable support structures, then builders with existing leverage and ownership positions will be in the strongest position because they've already built resilience before the system adjusted. Either way, that's the plan. Stop assuming the system is carrying weight simply because the system made the promise. Audit where the actual burden lands, because increasingly the bill is arriving at your household. While you're out and about this week, make the time to do something nice for yourself. And while you're at it, take the time to do something nice for someone else. Until next time, we'll talk to you.
And that's a wrap. Thank you for listening and spending your time with us on I Take Your Point. For more unfiltered conversations like this, click the link in the description. Huge thank you to our production team. We couldn't do this without you. Quick disclaimer, the views shared are those of the host and guest and are for informational purposes only, not professional advice. Keep building your own table, take care, and be well.